Demons and Semi-Devils. Author, Jin Yong. Chapter 2, Part A. Chapter 2, Moonlight shone brightly on the beautiful cliff. After all that mess, the moon has risen to the middle of the sky. Duanyu kept on walking west. Even though he does not know any kung fu, his youth enabled him to keep this up. After about 10 kilometers he has already arrived in the back mountains of No Measure Mountain. He suddenly heard the sound of water running. Feeling thirsty, he went searching and found the creek. Under the moonlight the creek water looked clear and beautiful. Just as he put his into the creek, he heard sound of a branch cracking followed by the footsteps of 2 people. Duanyu immediately lied down by the creek, not daring to make a noise. Someone said, "There is a creek here, let's get a couple of drinks here before continuing." The voice sounded familiar to Duanyu as he suddenly recognized it as Gan Guanghao, the disciple of Zuo Zimu. Duanyu became even more still. The 2 of them walked up to the creek and started drinking. After a bit, Gan Guanghao spoke up, "Sister Ge, looks like we are already out of danger. Let's rest a while before going on." The girl seemed to have agreed as it sounded like both of them sat down by the creek. The girl spoke up, "You sure that the Divine Farmer clan won't have anyone this way?" Her voice is shaky, obviously scared. Gan Guanghao tried to calm her, "Don't worry, this path is as hidden as can be. Even some of us in the East faction don't know about it, not to mention the Divine Farmer clan." The girl asked, "Then how did you know about this?" Gan Guanghao replied, "Every 5 days, my master would take some of us here to try to crack the secret of the No Measure Jade Cliff. All these years, all we did was stare at the rock like a bunch of retards. Master kept on saying something to the effect of to get things done you must show perseverance and determination and good things come to those with aspirations. But I really just can't stand it anymore, so sometimes I excuse myself to do that kind of personal business to come out here and wander around. That's how I found this path." The girl laughed a little and said, "So you don't want to put in the work and ran off? I say in your faction, you probably have the least perseverance and determination." Gan Guanghao laughed and replied, "Sister Ge, in the competition 5 years ago, when I lost to you." The girl cuts in, "Don't you say that you lost to me again. You pretended that your inner strength was weaker and let me win on purpose. Others can't tell, but don't you think I know?" Duanyu thought to himself, "So this girl is a disciple of the West faction of No Measure Sword." Gan Guanghao replied, "The moment I saw you, I swore to myself that I will spend the rest of my life with you no matter what. Luckily such a rare chance came today with the Divine Farmer clan coming to attack. Not to mention that pair of bastard guy and girl and their stinking Martin. The entire Sword Lake Palace was a mess, giving us such a great opportunity to run away. Wouldn't you say that this is good things come to those with aspirations?" The girl laughed a bit and tenderly replied, "I say good things came to those with aspirations for me as well." Gan Guanghao replied, "Sister Ge, if you treat me this way, then I would listen to whatever you say for the rest of my life." The girl sighed, "With us betraying our masters and running off like this, we can't ever stand in the martial world ever again. We should go as far away as we can, find a nice and secret place and hide there away from our masters and sect members. I'm scared just thinking about them finding us." Gan Guanghao replied, "I say you don't have that much to worry about. Seems like the Divine Farmer clan came prepared this time. Besides the 2 of us, I don't think anyone else would be able to escape." The girl sighed again. "Hopefully." Duanyu became very angry and thought to himself, "The 2 of you becoming husband and wife and running off when seeing that there is trouble is really no big deal. But why wish death upon your master and martial brothers? Such evil hearts." But he was still wise enough to figure out that if they found out he is here they would kill him to keep this quiet. So he still did not make a noise. The girl asked, "What is the big deal about this No Measure Jade Cliff? You have lived here for 10 years now, haven't you at least found something?" Gan Guanghao replied, "Since we are together now, I have nothing to hide from you. Master said that a long while back, at that time his master was the head of the East faction. Under the moonlight, he often sees faint reflections practicing swords on the cliff. Sometimes it's a man, sometimes it's a woman, and then other times they are sparring. The kind of sword skill they were displaying was something that he has never even dreamed of, much less heard of or seen. It is as if they were angels. He hoped to learn a couple of moves, but not only are the reflections on the cliff just too fast and too amazing, but they also seem supernatural as if non-existent. He just can't make out anything clearly, much less learn a move or two. The angels don't appear regularly either. Sometimes they appear every night, sometimes there are months between appearances. My master's master became so obsessed with the reflections on the cliff that he actually became worse and worse at our own sex sword skills and doesn't even train his students anymore. That's how the West faction won later on. Sister GE, when your master's master came to live in Sword Lake Palace, did she see anything? The girl replied, I heard from my master that her master saw the images on the cliff as well. But Grand Master only saw the woman and never seen any of man angel. Maybe it was because her master was a woman so only the female angel appeared to her. But after 2 years, she was gone as well. Her master also said that the sword skills were incredible, but they were just too fast and the reflections were too blurry for her to see it clearly. The cliff is separated by the canyon and the Sword Lake, so she couldn't get closer to have a better look. Grand Master obviously received a gift from the heavens, yet she just cannot learn even a move or two. For that you can just imagine how she felt inside. After the reflections stopped appearing, she would spend days upon days staring at the cliff. She just got weaker and weaker until she died of illness about half a year later. She died lying on the peak, and would not let her disciples move her back to Sword Lake Palace. Master said that even as she drew her last breath she was still staring at the cliff. She paused a bit before continuing, Brother Gon, do you really believe there are angels? Or are our Grand Masters lying to us? Gan Guanghao replied, I don't think both our Grand Masters made up such a story to deceive their disciples. Even if we believed it, then what? Besides, Martial Uncle Sheng told me that he saw the images with his very own 2 eyes. But are there really angels in the world? That I do not know. The girl asked, is it possible that it's 2 masters practicing swords in front of the cliff and was reflected onto the cliff? Gan Guanghao answered, Grandmaster thought about that as well at the time. But right in front of the cliff is the Sword Lake, and west of the lake is the canyon. Even if the 2 master martial artists knew how to walk on water and were practicing on the lake, Grandmaster would have seen them. If they were practicing on this side of the lake, then they really are too far away to cast any kind of reflection onto the cliff. The girl said, after my Grandmaster died, her disciples performed rites and prayed in front of the cliff every night, hoping the angels would appear again. But they never did see it again. My master also wants to just get one glance at the angels, but it just so happens that we have lost both contests to your East faction in the last 10 years. Gan Guanghao replied, from now on, there is no East or West faction between us. We East and West is connected in marriage and merge as one. The girl moaned a couple of times and said, stop that. Obviously Gan Guanghao is trying to get a little closer with her, but the girl is refusing. Gan Guanghao spoke up, from this day forth, if I ever betray your heart in any way, then let me fall into this creek and become a turtle. The girl coquettishly laughed, you turn into a turtle? Then what does that say about me? When Duan Yu heard that, he can't help but let out a laugh. As soon as the laughter came out he knew he was in trouble. So he jumped up and started to run. Gan Guanghao's voice came from behind him, who is it? His voice was followed by the sound of his footsteps, coming after him. Duan Yu seems to have problems controlling his sense of humor, doesn't he? Duan Yu can't believe his luck and ran for his life. Suddenly, a flash of white came from the west. A girl with a sword in hand is coming down the slope as if to cut him off. Duan Yu let out an "I-O" and turned toward the east. All the while he kept on praying, Great benevolent and merciful Bodhisattva, please bless and protect your humble disciple Duan Yu out of this mess. He can still hear the footsteps of Gan Guanghao chasing after him, so he kept right on running. After a while, he started having trouble keeping this up and his breathing became very hard. Gan Guanghao suddenly spoke up, Sister GE, block that pass over there. Duan Yu thought to himself, you giving your life away is really no big deal. But if you die you are taking Miss Zhang's life with you, as well as all the people in the Divine Farmer clan. Now that indeed is a sin. Amida Buddha and Bodhisattva. Then his thoughts turned, Duan Yu my good man, so what if they become turtles? What does that have to do with you? Why did you laugh for no reason whatsoever? With that laugh you have killed dozens of lives. Only unrivaled beauties can bring down cities with a smile or laugh. Who do you think you are with this little laugh of yours? What are you planning on bringing down? Even though he is blaming and scolding himself in his mind, his legs had not let up yet. By now he doesn't really care where he is going, just as long as it is deeper into the woods. After running for a while more, Duan Yu's legs felt completely numb and soft. Suddenly he heard the sound of water running, very loud sound in fact, as if the tides were just coming in. He looked up and saw a huge waterfall falling off of a cliff to the northwest. Over the water noise, he heard Gan Guanghao's voice, "Just ahead of you is the restricted area of our sect. No one can enter. If you just go forward a few more meters, you would be trespassing and will die without a burial place." Duan Yu thought to himself, "Even if I don't trespass into the restricted area, it's not like you'll let me go. Best I could hope for is dying with a burial place. Really not much difference between having a burial place and not having one." So he picked up his speed even more. Gan Guanghao shouted even louder, "Stop now. Don't you want to live? Just ahead is." Duan Yu laughed and replied back, "I want to live, that's why I'm running." Before he could finish his sentence, his foot suddenly had nothing to step on. He doesn't know any kung fu and is in such a hurry, how could he possibly pull back from that? So he just fell. He screamed, "Ayo!" But by now his body is already more than 20 meters below the top of the cliff where he lost his footing. Duan Yu wildly waved his arm around, desperately hoping to be able to grab onto something. But as he is doing so, he fell another 200 meters or so. Suddenly his bottom hit something and his body was sprung back upwards. Turns out that he fell onto an old pine tree that was growing out of the face of the cliff. With a terrible rumble, the huge trunk of the pine snapped, but the force of Duan Yu's fall had been mostly cancelled out. Duan Yu started to fall down again. This time he reached out with both his arms and grabbed onto another trunk of the pine tree. So there he is, hanging in mid-air, swinging back and forth. He looked down and did not see the bottom of the canyon, merely clouds. At this moment, his body has been swung against the cliff. He immediately reached out with his left hand and grabbed onto a shorter branch close to the face of the cliff and found a place for his foot to balance himself. Only now was he finally able to calm down and slowly move his body completely up against the face of the cliff. He looked up to the old pine tree and said, "Grandfather Pine, thank you so much for your display of your abilities that saved my life. Back then your ancestor helped Qing Shi Huang, first emperor in Chinese history, get out of the rain and was granted the title of 5th rank senior official. But how can saving a life compare with protecting against the rain? I'm going to give you the position of 6th rank senior official. No, on second thought, definitely 7th or 8th rank senior official." He looked around him carefully and saw that the cliff has a huge crack in it, one which he might be able to use to scale down. He took a couple of deep breaths to calm himself and thought, "Gan Guanghao and that sister Ge of his surely would have thought that I am dead by now. No way in the world could they have guessed that I would be rescued by an 8th-ranked senior official. They have probably already left the mountain to work on their merging of East and West factions. Who knows what kind of danger is on the bottom of this cliff, but my life is living on borrowed time anyway, doesn't really matter where I lose it again. But since Bodhisattva is protecting me, it's better not to lose it for her." So he started to slowly descend along the crack. Inside the crack grew a lot of weeds and small plants, so there really is no danger of losing his footing and falling again. The only problem is this cliff seemed to go on forever. After a while, his clothing were full of holes and rips from the plants along the crack, not to mention his hands and feet. After what seemed like forever, he still haven't reached the bottom, but fortunately as the cliff gets to the bottom it became less and less steep, not straight down anymore. So by then Duan Yu was able to just half roll and half crawl down, which is much faster. But the sound of water splashing just kept on getting louder and louder. Duan Yu started to worry again. What if the bottom of this is white water rapids? Large water pellets were hitting his face, which was actually kind of painful. Before he had too much time to think all this over, and it wasn't like he had much choice in the matter, he has reached the bottom of the cliff. When he stood up, he could not help but to scream in astonishment. For on the cliff on the left side there is a waterfall falling from the sky like a jade dragon falling from the sky into a big and unusually clear lake. Despite of the waterfall, the lake is not filled up, meaning that there must be a way for the water to leave the valley. The water where the waterfall enters the lake is in turmoil, however, merely a little bit over 20 meters away from the waterfall the waters become calm and flat as a mirror. The moon shines down onto the lake as there is also a moon shining back from the lake. Facing this scene, Duan Yu was left gaping, not even able to sigh in astonishment. He looked over to the side and saw several bushes of camellias by the lake shore, looking as if they are alive under the moonlight. The camellias of Yunnan are the best in the world and Duan Yu has always loved them. So now he actually stopped thinking about the predicament he is in and walked over to get a closer look at the flowers. All the while muttering to himself, even though there's lots of flowers here, there are only a couple of types really. And only these few feathered shirt, rainbow skirt are better than the ones at my house. These lotus every step over here, on the other hand, aren't pure at all. After enjoying the camellias for a while, he walked over to the lake and drank some water. The water felt clean and soothing on the tongue with an unusual sweetness as a cool and smooth string of water went all the way into his stomach. After recovering from the drink, he stood up and walked alongside the lake shore hoping to find a way out. The lake is oval in shape, and more than half of it is hidden underneath bushes of flowers and trees. He walked from west to east and then back again to circle the lake once, which a trip of about 1.5 kilometers. It turns out that the cliff surrounds the lake on all four sides with no paths out. The side that he fell from is the least steep portion of all, so it is impossible to climb on the others. Looking up, he sees that the cliff extends to above the clouds. Getting down from halfway was almost impossible, but climbing back up really is impossible. Duan thought to himself, even someone with the best kung fu in the world won't be able to get up there, so it's obvious there is not much difference between knowing or not knowing kung fu. By now it was getting close to dawn, but the entire place remained incredibly still. Not a single trace or sign of an animal, not to mention humans. The only thing that could be heard was a couple of birds chirping at each other. Duan started to worry again. It is no big deal if I starve to death here, but then that would mean that Miss Zong would die as well. I can't let her down like that. Not to mention my mom and dad are probably worried sick about me. He sat down by the lake and worried in vain, unable to come up with a single idea as to what to do. In desperation, he started to imagine, what if I can turn into a fish, then I could swim up the waterfall and get out of here. He turned to look at the waterfall more closely. Suddenly he noticed that the cliff besides it is smooth like jade. He figured that this is probably due to the fact that a long time ago the flow of water was much more than it is now and wore the cliff to its present smooth state. Then the water flow decreased and exposed this smooth as glass and bright as a mirror part of the cliff. Suddenly, the conversation between Gan Guanghao and that sister sin of his flashed in Duan Yu's mind, so this must be the no-measure jade cliff that they were talking about. They said that back then, when the moon is bright, the head of both East and West factions often saw images of angels practicing swords on the cliff. This cliff is right besides the cliff. For the image to reflect onto it, they really have to be practicing in the middle of the lake. If I stand here on the east of the lake my image could reflect onto the cliff as well, but the cliff on this side is straight up and blocks out the moonlight, which would make that impossible. Ah. I get it. Must be because there are some waterfowls flying close to the surface of the lake so their images were reflected onto the cliff. From afar, then of course, the movements are incredible, fast, and strange. They have already assumed that it was angels practicing swords, so that is what they thought they saw every time. Of course, they can't make anything out of the display of sword skills and eventually went down the wrong path and became obsessed.